The Middle East is a place where war and diplomacy, religion and resistance all collide. But the tension between Israel and Iran is not like other rivalries. It's deeper, more dangerous, and global in its impact. This isn't just a dispute between two countries, it's an ideological, geopolitical, and military standoff that threatens to spiral into regional, even global war. With both nations engaged in a shadow war of cyberattacks, proxy battles, and nuclear threats, the world is left holding its breath. To truly understand how we got here, where all this is heading, we need to go back in time. We need to start at the beginning. The story of modern Israel and Iran goes back to the end of World War II and the beginning of the Cold War. It is a story of competing narratives, of two states, 6 decades of conflict, countless lives lost, millions of refugees created, and it is a story that is still being written today. This is the long game. Now we will look at how this rivalry developed, how it has played out on the ground, in the air, and online, and what it means for the future of the region and the world. This is our show. Before 1979, Israel and Iran were friends. They were bound by common interests, a shared history, and strong leadership. They cooperated on oil, trade, and military technology. But that all changed in 1979 when Iran's Western-backed Shah Mohammad Reza Pahlavi was overthrown and the country's government was taken over by this man, Ayatollah Khomeini. He established a theocratic Islamic republic and immediately severed ties with Israel, calling it an illegitimate Zionist regime. From that moment, Iran's new government positioned itself as the champion of Palestinian resistance and a sworn enemy of Israel. The alliance was shattered and replaced by deep animosity rooted in religion, politics, and identity. So, how did these two Muslim-majority nations go from being allies to mortal enemies in the span of a year? Well, to understand their enmity, we must first look at their history and how they became friends in the first place. Both Iran and Israel share a long history. The modern State of Israel was established in 1948, just a few years after the Iranian dynasty known as the Pahlavi dynasty came into power. Despite their different religions and cultures, both nations were modernizing and secularizing. They saw each other as potential allies against the threat of Soviet communism. In 1953, the United States, under the leadership of President Dwight D. orchestrated a coup which overthrew Iran's Prime Minister, Mohammad Mossad, who had been elected in a landslide election. But the relationship between Iran and Israel was never easy. There were always tensions and disagreements. Nevertheless, the two nations continued to cooperate on a variety of issues, including trade, investment, and security. In the early 1970s, Iran became one of Israel's largest trading partners. Israeli companies invested heavily in Iran's economy, and Israeli military technology was used by the Iranian army. The two nations also cooperated closely on intelligence matters and the exchange of information. However, the relationship between Iran and Israel was doomed to fail. The Iranian Revolution of 1979 overthrew the Shah and replaced him with a radical religious leader, Ayatollah Khomeini. The new government of Iran had no interest in maintaining relations with Israel and severed ties with the Jewish state. Instead, Iran became a staunch supporter of the Palestinians and their right to resist the Zionist entity. The relationship between Iran and Israel went from one of cooperation to one of hostility in the span of a year. And today, the two nations remain bitter enemies. Today's big question: why does Iran use proxy groups like Hezbollah and Hamas? To answer it, we have to go back to 2006, when Israel was still riding high on the high horse after its victory in the Second Lebanon War. They had just defeated Hezbollah in a 34-day conflict that ended with a unbrokered ceasefire. But as the dust settled, it became clear that Hezbollah was still a potent force in Lebanon, and that the status quo was not sustainable. You see, Israel had hoped that defeating Hezbollah would deter future attacks from the group, but their wishful thinking was soon shattered by 2 suicide bombings in northern Israel. In retaliation, Israel struck back at Hezbollah positions in Lebanon, and this tit-for-tat violence continued for years, including deadly attacks on both sides. It was a low-intensity conflict that threatened to boil over into a larger war. But then something unexpected happened. Hezbollah surprised everyone, including Israel, by launching a massive rocket barrage into northern Israel. This was no longer low-intensity conflict. This was war, and in the span of 34 days, everything changed. Hezbollah fired some 4,000 rockets and mortars at every inch of Israel, killing 43 civilians and 120 soldiers. Israeli cities were in ruins, and the government was desperate to stop the bleeding. Ceasefire talks were held in the midst of the chaos, and the fighting eventually stopped, but not before Hezbollah proved that they were a force to be reckoned with. The war ended with a unbrokered ceasefire, but it was clear that things would never be the same again. Why did Hezbollah launch this devastating attack on Israel? Well, it all comes down to one simple reason: leverage. By attacking Israel, Hezbollah was able to put pressure on the Israeli government and force them to the negotiating table. They may not have been able to win an all-out war, but they didn't need to. All they needed to do was make it too costly for Israel to continue fighting, and they succeeded. In fact, this has been Iran's strategy all along. They don't want to fight Israel head-on, because they know they can't win. So instead, they use proxy groups like Hezbollah and Hamas to do their bidding. It's a way of keeping Israel on the back foot and preventing them from striking Iran's nuclear program. For example, in Gaza, Iran provides funding and weapons to Hamas, a Sunni group ideologically aligned against Israel. Similarly, in Iraq and Syria, Iran backs various Shiite militias that attack U.S. troops and installations. These groups don't necessarily share Iran's ultimate goals, but they do share a common enemy in the United States. So Iran uses this animosity to manipulate them and achieve its own ends. This form of warfare is known as asymmetric warfare, which involves using unconventional tactics and strategies to fight against a more powerful opponent. It's a way of leveling the playing field and making up for any military shortcomings, and Iran has become a master of this type of warfare. Of course, Israel is not sitting idly by. They have conducted targeted airstrikes in Lebanon, Gaza, and Syria to weaken Iran's military infrastructure. But so far, none of these strikes have been enough to deter Iran. If anything, they've only made Iran more determined to continue supporting their proxies. So what's the solution here? Well, there isn't an easy one. Asymmetric warfare is a difficult problem to solve, because it involves fighting an enemy that doesn't play by the same rules. It requires a different way of thinking and a willingness to get creative. But ultimately, there is no military solution to this conflict. It will require a political one. While the proxy wars raged on, a far more dangerous threat emerged: Iran's nuclear program. Iran insisted its goals were peaceful: energy, medicine, and scientific development, but Western intelligence and Israeli agencies believed otherwise. In 2002, secret nuclear facilities in Natanz and Arak were exposed. Israel sounded the alarm, claiming Iran was on the path to building a bomb. The world responded with sanctions, negotiations, and finally, in 2015, the JCPOA, the Iran nuclear deal. It limited Iran's uranium enrichment in exchange for sanctions relief. But Israel rejected the deal. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu called it a deception, a temporary pause, not a permanent solution. In 2018, President Donald Trump withdrew the US from the deal, reimposing sanctions. Iran responded by enriching uranium beyond agreed limits. The region was now facing a dangerous nuclear standoff, with Israel declaring it would not allow Iran to ever build a nuclear weapon, no matter the cost. They say silence is golden, but in the world of international conflict, silence can be deadly. While missiles weren't always flying, a silent war was being fought in the digital realm and through intelligence operations. In 2010, the world learned about a sophisticated computer virus, reportedly created by Israel and the United States. The worm made its way into Iran's nuclear program, infecting the computers that controlled the centrifuges enriching uranium. It set Iran's nuclear program back by years, and while it never caused an explosion or even killed anyone directly, its impact was undeniable. The virus is considered a pivotal moment in the history of cyber warfare, demonstrating the potential for digital attacks to achieve strategic goals without firing a single shot. And as the world grappled with the implications of Stuxnet, Iran was preparing its response. In the following years, Iranian cyberattacks against Israel increased in frequency and sophistication. Israeli water systems, transportation networks, and private businesses were all hit. The economic impact was significant, but so was the psychological one. A shadow war was raging in the darkness of computer servers and databases, invisible to most but with very real consequences. These cyberstrikes were like the opening act of a symphony of shadows. They may not have been as flashy as missile strikes, but they were no less impactful. In the quiet hours when most people are asleep, hackers with specialized skills are engaged in their own kind of battle. They use their expertise to infiltrate computer systems, steal sensitive data, or disrupt critical infrastructure. This form of warfare is often hidden from the public eye, but its effects can be just as devastating as any military engagement. As the cyber war intensified, so did the physical danger. In 2011, a car bomb killed 5 Iranian scientists at a Tehran university. The following year, another bomb in the same location killed another scientist and wounded 21 people. Soon, fingers were pointed and accusations were made. Both Iran and Israel had a motive and the means to carry out such attacks, making it difficult to assign blame. But as the body count rose, so did the international concern. The targeting of scientists, not just any scientists, but those working on nuclear technology, raised the stakes of this shadow war to a whole new level. It was a stark reminder of how fragile the peace could be and how easily it could be shattered. Then in 2020, Mohsen Fakhrizadeh was assassinated outside of Tehran. He was the father of Iran's nuclear weapons program, and his death was a major blow to Iran's nuclear ambitions. Now, while no one claimed responsibility for the attack, the finger of suspicion pointed once again towards Israel. According to Iranian officials, Fakhrizadeh was killed by a remote-controlled machine gun mounted on a satellite. If true, it would be the first known instance of a space-based weapon being used in an assassination. Though some experts question whether a satellite could be controlled with that level of precision, the fact remains that the attack was carried out with minimal risk to the perpetrator and maximum impact on Iran's nuclear program. Fakhrizadeh's death was not just a military loss for Iran, it was also a symbolic one. It sent a clear message that no one, no matter how powerful, was truly safe from the long arm of the shadow war. This series of attacks and assassinations serves as a reminder of the dangers of living in an interconnected world. In an era where technology continues to advance at an unprecedented pace, the methods and strategies of warfare are also evolving. What may seem like a simple cyber attack or a remote assassination is, in reality, a calculated move in a larger game of geopolitical chess. So the next time you hear about a cyber attack or an assassination in a foreign country, take a moment to consider the bigger picture. It may not be as flashy as battles fought with bombs and bullets, but the war of shadows is no less real, and its impact on our world is profound. In 2020, a major diplomatic shift stunned the world. That Abraham Accords, brokered by the United States, led to UAE, Bahrain, Sudan, and Morocco normalizing relations with Israel. For decades, Arab states had refused formal ties with Israel until Palestine was free. But growing concern over Iran's regional power changed that. These Arab nations, especially the Gulf states, viewed Iran's missile program, militia funding, and nuclear ambitions as a greater threat than Israel. This marked the creation of a new Middle Eastern bloc. Israel sword-aligned Gulf states, Egypt, and the US, all unofficially united in opposition to Iranian expansion. Iran, feeling increasingly isolated, doubled down on its alliances with Syria, Hezbollah, and the Houthis in Yemen. The region became a strategic chessboard, not just of ideology, but of shifting military and economic interests. What began as a bilateral hostility had now become a multi-nation regional Cold War. In this shadow war, some blows were too significant to ignore. On January 3, 2020, a U.S. drone strike near Baghdad airport, backed by Israeli intelligence, killed Qasem Soleimani, Iran's most powerful military commander and head of the elite Quds force. Soleimani was not just a general. He was the architect of Iran's proxy network across the Middle East. His assassination sent shockwaves through Iran, with promises of severe revenge. Later that year, Mohsen Fakhrizadeh, Iran's top nuclear scientist, was assassinated near Tehran. Though Israel never officially claimed responsibility, Iran pointed the finger squarely at the Mossad. These high-profile killings didn't just eliminate key figures. They humiliated the Iranian regime and risked triggering direct military retaliation. Though both sides stopped short of full-blown war, each attack brought them one step closer to the edge. The stakes had never been higher. You can call it the forgotten front line, because nowhere is the Israel-Iran conflict more visible than in Syria. When the Syrian civil war erupted in 2011, Iran poured resources, fighters and weapons into propping up President Bashar. That included, by some estimates, as many as 30,000 Iranian-backed fighters from groups like Hezbollah. They established a strong presence near Israel's northern border, which for Israel was a red line. Israel launched hundreds of airstrikes in Syria over the past decade, targeting Iranian weapons, convoys, missile sites and command centers. And what did Iran do in response? They hit back with missiles, and they used Syria as a launchpad to test Israeli defenses and supply advanced weaponry to Hezbollah. So we have a situation where two regional powers are using a third country as a proxy battlefield. It's a classic Cold War strategy, but with added danger. Why? Because this isn't the first time we're seeing it. In the last century, Syria has been occupied or influenced by global powers. First it was the French, then the Americans, the Soviets, and now the battleground is between Iran and Israel. What makes this so complicated is that neither side wants to back down. Iran sees its support for Assad as crucial to its own security and its influence in the region. For Israel, it's a matter of existential security. They see the Iranian presence at their doorstep as a threat. Remember, Israel has fought numerous wars with neighboring Arab states. Many of those wars were about preventing a regional arms race. Now you have a ring of Iranian-backed militias surrounding Israel on all sides. so neither side wants to compromise. And caught in the middle is Syria and the Syrian people. It's estimated that as many as 500,000 civilians have been killed in this conflict. Millions more have been displaced, and entire cities reduced to rubble. It's a humanitarian catastrophe, but it's also a dangerous escalation. Because Syria is no longer just a civil war zone. It's become the epicenter of a regional power struggle. Every strike, every retaliation brings the risk of dragging neighboring countries deeper into the conflict. We've already seen it with Lebanon and Iraq. Both countries have suffered greatly from the spillover of the Syrian conflict. So what's the solution here? As long as Iran sees Israel as an existential threat, and as long as Israel feels threatened by Iran's growing influence, the fighting will continue. And as long as the fighting continues, Syria will remain a proxy battlefield. While Iran hasn't built a nuclear bomb yet, which is the world's most dangerous and deadliest threat, arguably, its growing arsenal of ballistic missiles is a very close second. Why? Because those missiles, many of which can reach Israel, US bases in the region, and Israel's allies in the Persian Gulf, they're a central part of Iran's deterrent strategy. Now, Iran insists it's for defense, but its recent missile tests and military parades tell a different story. Some of those missiles even carry messages in Hebrew, not Arabic, but in Hebrew. The missiles say, Israel must be wiped out. Folks, that's hardly a message of a defense. That's a message of aggression, and an extreme one at that. Now clearly, this build-up is a major concern, not only for Israel but for the entire region and for the United States as well. And what we're seeing here is an ongoing and very dangerous arms race. We've talked about it before here on the newscast, a strategic and conventional arms race. Iran clearly feels that it is surrounded by enemies, sworn enemies, enemies that it refers to as the Great Satan, the United States, and a Zionist entity, Israel. And it's surrounded by these enemies throughout the Middle East, in particular in the Persian Gulf. And so Iran has been steadily and in recent years increasingly building up its missile stockpiles. Not only the number of missiles, but the capability of those missiles, the range, the accuracy. And now we're hearing that some of these missiles can carry multiple warheads, folks, which makes them even more deadly and more accurate. Now, Israel, for its part, has spent billions of dollars on missile defense systems, Iron Dome, David's Sling, the Arrow system, which have all proven to be very effective thus far. They've intercepted rockets fired from Gaza and from Syria. But the major concern remains if Iran and its proxies, whether Hamas, Hezbollah, Islamic Jihad, the Houthis in Yemen, the militias in Iraq and Syria, if they were to launch a full-scale missile barrage at Israel. Even the most sophisticated and advanced missile defense systems may not be able to intercept all of those missiles, and some would get through and hit major Israeli population centers. We're talking about Tel Aviv, Jerusalem, the central region of the country. Folks, that is why there is so much concern, because this Iranian missile buildup is growing by the day. It's a major game changer in the region. As of today, Israel and Iran are still not in open war. They are just in surgical strike. But the line between shadow conflict and full-scale confrontation has never been thinner. The nuclear issue remains dangerously unresolved. Proxy wars continue to intensify and cyberattacks grow more sophisticated and aggressive. Both nations are locked in a vicious cycle of threats and retaliation, with no diplomatic solution in sight. Attempts to revive the Iran nuclear deal have stalled. Mutual trust almost non-existent. What makes this rivalry so explosive is its potential to ignite a global crisis. A war between Israel and Iran wouldn't remain confined to their borders. It could drag in Lebanon, Syria, the United States, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and even global powers like Russia and China. The entire Middle East could be set ablaze, politically, militarily, and economically within hours. And yet, even in this chaos, faint glimmers of hope remain. Secret negotiations, civilian resistance in Iran, and shared international interests in avoiding war. But time is running out. The military drills are intensifying. Missile systems are on standby. Troop movements are being tracked. Intelligence is on high alert. The war isn't coming. It may have already started. We may be witnessing the opening act of a long and complex battle. One that will be fought not just on physical battlefields, but also on diplomatic fronts, economic arenas, and in the hearts and minds of people around the world. This is a story that will continue to unfold. It is a story that you should not miss, so stay tuned. Keep watching this space for more updates. If you found this story eye-opening, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us bring more untold stories and powerful documentaries from around the world. And hit the bell icon so you never miss an update. Follow us for more deep dives into global conflicts, hidden histories, and real stories that matter from our generation.